Hey guys, Modelling Weekly here. For today's video, I'll be having another crack at the unfeasibly small scale that is 1:144, which I know a lot of you will appreciate. The kit in question is a short-run production from the small company Mark I Models, so let's see how this pans out. Enjoy! Consisting of only a handful of parts, this kit is definitely simplistic. As a result, everything included is packed into a single Ziploc bag as shown in the video. For only £11 here in the UK, it's not a bad deal. You of course get instructions, decals and the plastic parts, but alongside this you also get some lovely resin extras that I'll show in a second. The plastic parts themselves aren't bad at all. The detail is of course minimal, so I'll have to carry out some modifications here, but in fairness the kit does include recessed panel details and there is hardly any flash present, so not too bad at all. And here is the resin cockpit tub included in the kit. Some lovely detail is included in this, so it's great to see. One of the aircraft's cannons is also included in resin. The canopy glass is pretty thick, as can be expected, but there's nothing that can really be done about this. It is, however, crystal clear. And finally the decals. These look surprisingly good, I have to say. They're well registered with good colours and not too thick at all. Let's crack on with the build. The first step I carried out with this build was the addition of some of the major rivet lines on the aircraft. These would help to enhance the kit's surface detail massively, adding a new element of interest and really elevating the kit's detail overall. For this purpose, I made use of a Galaxy Tools rivet maker with a 0.55mm pitch. This was definitely a bit large for such a small model, but it's not too noticeable, so I decided to go along with it regardless. All the rivet lines were sanded with 3000 grit sanding sponge afterwards to make them flush with the surface. Next up, I modified the air intake at the front of the aircraft. This was a clunky detail with holes that did not pass all the way through, and so in order to enhance this, I brought out the Dremel and removed some of the material within the intake to give it a more lifelike appearance. With those two first modifications carried out, I could fit everything to the inside of the fuselage with the aim of sealing it up to do some filling work. I decided to avoid painting the cockpit at this stage, as it being in the fuselage didn't really make a difference to the difficulty of this, thanks to the way it was designed. I then added some nose weight in the form of lead wire. This aircraft was a commission build, and at this stage the client wanted it with gear up, so this was technically unnecessary. However, in case they changed their mind, I added the weight as an insurance. With that, the fuselage halves could be sealed up. The wings and horizontal stabilizers featured in this kit were a little tricky to install, as there were no guiding elements whatsoever, but with a little bit of work and patience I was able to achieve the correct angles and geometry. Some filler would be needed, however. Any gaps and seam lines on this kit were filled with VMS Flexi 5K CA, my favourite product for filling minor gaps on a model. Once dry, it's a lot more stable than standard modelling fillers, meaning those seam lines won't be reappearing anytime soon when the model is complete. This was applied with a cocktail stick. Excess was then removed with a series of sanding sponges, working up from 400 grit all the way to 3000, with a final polish from a microfiber cloth. Unfortunately, the gear doors included in the kit weren't even close to fitting in their corresponding surface recesses, and as the client still wanted the gear raised, I had to improvise. I decided to make use of Tamiya 2-part epoxy, which I could use to fill the gaps, and then sculpt in any details that were present on the kit parts. Tap water was used throughout the process to prevent the epoxy from sticking to the cocktail stick, and I made sure to score the plastic underneath to improve the epoxy's grip. All things considered, they didn't turn out too badly. Before we crack on with some painting, I'd just like to say a massive thanks to all of my Modelling Weekly channel members here on YouTube. Your support is absolutely invaluable and I can't thank you all enough. If you're interested in receiving some extra perks whilst also supporting what I do, feel free to click the join button down below for more info. Anyway, let's get on with the painting. A once-over was first given to the cockpit using Mr. Colour C337, a slightly blue-grey tone that almost perfectly matched the cockpit colour I found in reference pictures. I didn't bother with a primer at this stage as it wouldn't really make a difference given the scale. I then brought out an acrylic black shade and began adding the various cockpit details that needed this colour, for example the seat padding and instrument panel. Following this, I also added some extra details using white, yellow and red acrylics. With the canopy glass masked and added, I could move on to some proper painting. Before a primer layer, however, I made sure to spray the canopy with the cockpit shade so that the inside of the struts wouldn't appear black instead of grey. I selected the old reliable Mr. Surfacer 1500 Black as the primer for this build, serving not only as an initial paint layer but also as a great starting point for a bit of monochromatic pre-shading. This product was sprayed through my Harder & Steenbeck Ultra, making use of a 0.4mm nozzle set to aid with coverage. AKRC White was then employed to bring out the panels and surface features of the aircraft. This was a critical stage in the model's construction as this paint layer would massively influence the following colour layers. In order to give the model the appearance of being much larger than it actually is, I made sure to keep my modelling as small and tight as possible, providing incredibly fine variation to the model's surface. On the underside of the aircraft, I then augmented the pre-shading with the addition of some Tamiya Royal Blue. This would help in giving the final paint layer a different kind of discoloration, adding even more interest to an otherwise solid tone. It also helped in simulating sun damage, as this aircraft will be featuring an Egyptian scheme. Blue Azure from AKRC was then blocked in over the underside. I thinned this paint quite heavily and sprayed it with reservation in order to retain the effect created by the pre-shading to a certain extent. Overall, I was very happy with the way this effect turned out and decided that the addition of post-shading wasn't really necessary. With the underside masked, I could then move on to the lighter of the two camouflage colours on the top side. I employed the use of AKRC Buff at this stage rather than any dedicated desert yellow tones. AK's Buff shade is a very tan coloured mix, giving it an almost exact match to some of the sun damaged aircraft that I saw in reference pictures. Happy with this first shade, I moved on to masking it off for the addition of the darker brown. I made use of a masking putty for this purpose, as it allowed for tight and sharp curves to be achieved without the need for tricky masks to be cut out of tape. The great thing about this product is that it doesn't affect the model's surface whatsoever, unlike say Blue Tack. A basic Tamiya Earth shade was applied in order to simulate the darker of the two camo colours. Whilst in reality this should be a bit darker, I decided it was in keeping with the war-torn and sun-damaged appearance of the rest of the paint job. As this paint layer did not receive the benefits of the pre-shading, I added some buff to the earth shade and used this to highlight the centres of any panels that the darker tone overlapped. This was an essential step in ensuring that the tone matched the rest of the camo scheme. In addition to the highlights, I employed a shader ink from MiG ammo to simulate the effect the pre-shading would have had along the panel lines in the darker areas. This was sprayed directly from the bottle through my Infinity. With the masking putty removed, it's looking pretty good. This scheme also features an olive green nose section, so this was masked off and hand painted with thinned acrylics, as I didn't feel the airbrush was warranted for such a small element. A gloss coat was then applied in the form of Mr. GX100, and this stuff is absolutely lovely and prepared the aircraft nicely for a spot of decal application. As there were only 10 decals for this scheme, they were applied pretty much all in one go, making use of the classic micro set and sole combination. Despite being in-house decals, they actually conformed and set in place really nicely. Some bigger companies could learn a thing or two from these guys. I'm looking at you, Tamia. The decals were then protected with a nice layer of GX114 flat varnish, providing a nice porous surface for a bit of oil weathering. As per usual, weathering was kicked off with a sepia oil wash applied to all the surface details and panel lines included on the kit. I made sure to keep the application of this wash constrained and precise, as the model was so small that flooding the surface with white spirit to remove the excess would likely remove the actual wash as well. A fine pointed brush was used to ensure precision at this stage. A slightly larger pointed brush was then loaded with white spirit and used to blend in the small amounts of excess around the panel lines. The left-hand wing you can see here has already been treated, and as you can see, the effect is subtle but really helps in aiding the war-torn appearance of the model. Some fine streaks of grime were then added to the underside using a fine brush and slightly thinned sepia oil paint, hinting at small fuel leaks along with dislodged grime that has built up along the panel lines. The paint here was then slightly blended in with a soft flat brush. The weathering stage was then finished off with a spot of chipping, which consisted of a heavily lightened tan acrylic paint. The use of aluminium chipping on such a small model would appear unrealistic, so this was a much more reserved approach. A final layer of GX114 helped to seal in all of the work that had been done up to this point. With the drop tanks added to the wings and the canopy masks removed, the kit was marked as complete. And here it is, an Egyptian MiG-17 from Mark I models in 1/4/4 scale. Overall, I'm pretty content with the result. I'm often very critical when it comes to assessing my completed builds, but if I may say so, I'm quite pleased with it. I'd say the pre-shading effect on this build is my most successful attempt at it yet, with the modulation in the final paint job really showing through. The weathering is also something that I'd say complements the final appearance pretty nicely. As modelers, we often try to push ourselves with every build we attempt, whether that be through the use of a new effect, technique, or product. But it doesn't always have to be like that. Sometimes it's fine to just focus on the skills we have and to enjoy the process itself, and I believe that sums up this kit. Whilst I didn't use any new techniques, it was still a very enjoyable build, and I feel that I effectively used the techniques that I've already played with in the past to create an effective result, and I'm looking forward to presenting it to the client. There are downsides to everything, however, and if I were to build the kit again, I'd definitely add a bit of extra distressing to the darker brown tone, as it kind of sits proud from the tan layer, so to speak. I'd be interested in hearing your opinions, however, so don't forget to leave a comment down below. I really hope you enjoyed this video or found it useful, and I look forward to presenting next week's instalment. That's it from me today, so another big thanks goes out to my Modelling Weekly channel members, along with all of you for watching this far. See you all next time. Bye!